It was a Tuesday. Rain clung to the office windows in delicate veins, threading down the glass like it had nowhere else to go. The city outside looked blurred, almost like an oil painting left too long in the sun. Inside, it smelled faintly of roasted beans from the cafe downstairs, mingling with the subtle trace of my perfume, the one Colin had gifted me years ago on our first board win. Blue orchid. I hadn't worn it in months. I remember adjusting my blazer that morning, smoothing the fabric of my navy dress, the one he once said made me look serious but beautiful. I wore it often when I needed to remind the board who helped build this place. My inbox was cluttered, as usual, supplier contracts, marketing approvals, quarterly projections. I barely noticed the new thread titled Executive Transition, Strategy, Draft, Internal Only. I clicked out of reflex, expecting something for my review. But the moment my eyes scanned the first paragraph, something cold gripped the base of my spine. It wasn't addressed to me. I had been CC'd by mistake. Rephased exit plan for A. McAllister. Given the ongoing challenges and misalignment in vision, we propose a strategic reduction of Amelia's involvement over Q2-Q4. Public messaging to emphasize her decision to step back for personal reasons. I froze. My name, written like a liability in a bullet-pointed plan. Misalignment, volatility, emotional burnout, as if I were a weathered office chair to be quietly replaced. The document stretched for pages, roles reassigned, press statements drafted, compensation packages capped. The signatures at the bottom blurred, but one stood out. Colin McAllister, CEO me husband, my partner, my executioner. The room fell away from me. The office we designed together. White marble floors, minimalist oak desks, art we chose on our honeymoon in Lisbon, now felt sterile, alien. I could hear the faint echo of someone laughing in the hallway. A young intern, maybe. Life, continuing, while mine cracked open like cheap porcelain. At first, I told myself it was a mistake. A draft. A miscommunication. I scrolled to the top, again, searching for a footnote or red line. But the timestamp was from 3 days ago. The approval date? Yesterday. And Colin, he'd kissed me this morning. Lightly. Casually. Told me to go easy on the espresso, and that I looked powerful. In blue, I thought it was affection. Maybe it was a goodbye. I wanted to stand, to storm into his office and demand an explanation. But I didn't move. My legs didn't trust me. Instead, I just stared out at the rain, watching the city's veins pulse under the storm. I could see my own reflection in the glass, barely there. A ghost wearing ambition like a second skin. He used to call me the soul of the company. Without you, it's just spreadsheets and logos, he once said during our first investor round. Funny, how quickly people rewrite their stories when the ink turns to power. My hand hovered over the delete button. I clicked it. Then I went to trash and restored the email. I needed to see it again, to believe it. The office door opened. Kayla, our executive assistant, poked her head in. "Want me to order your usual for lunch?" she asked, her tone cheerful, oblivious. I nodded, my voice stuck somewhere in my throat. "Sure, thanks." She left, and I sat there in the silence. I stared at my wedding ring, a modest platinum band with a tiny sapphire, Colin's birthstone. He said it reminded him of how calm I made him feel. I took it off and placed it on the desk beside my mouse. It looked small there, lonely. My phone buzzed. A message from Colin. "Don't forget. Dinner with the Hendersons tonight. Can't be. Late." So I wanted to throw the phone across the room, but I didn't. I just let it buzz until the screen went black. The betrayal wasn't loud. It didn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It was quiet. Professional. hidden in polished bullet points and sanitized HR language. That was the worst part. He didn't even have the decency to lie to my face. I didn't cry. Not yet. Not there. There were still people in the office. My people. The ones I'd hired, mentored, protected. I straightened my spine, shut my laptop, and stood up. As I walked to the restroom, past the photos on the hallway wall, Colin and I shaking hands with donors, posing beside startup incubators, grinning, with early staff. I felt something inside me slowly unfasten, a thread pulling loose. This company wasn't just my job. It was my story, my sacrifices, my sleepless nights, my name, erased in a memo. But he forgot something. I still had the original blueprint, and I still remembered every brick we laid. If someone had told the 27-year-old version of me, the woman in crisp linen blazers and wide-eyed certainty, that she'd one day be erased from her own empire, I think she would have laughed. Or maybe cried. I met Colin McAllister on a rooftop in Manhattan, under string lights and champagne buzz. He was magnetic, tall, confident, the kind of man who wore tailored suits like armor and made you feel like you were the only person in the room. I had just finished my MBA at Yale and was deciding between two aggressive offers in consulting. He was charming a group of investors half listening to a jazz quartet. He asked me what my dream was. Not in that sleazy networking tone. It felt like a genuine question. I told him I wanted to build something that lasted. He smiled and said, "So do I. But legacy's a team sport, you know?" That line stuck with me. Colin was the heir to a family company that had lost its way, McAllister & Cozen, a once proud textiles brand swallowed by irrelevance. He wanted to turn it into something else, something modern, and he wanted me to help. It started with late-night strategy sessions and pitch decks made in my studio apartment. We worked off folding tables, shared cold pizza, stayed up until 3 a.m., tweaking logos and spreadsheets like obsessed teenagers. He made me feel like a co-pilot, an equal. He told everyone that I was the brain behind the vision, at least at first. We grew fast. Loft offices, investor dinners, rebrands. Soon we weren't just running a company. We were becoming it. Every room we entered as a pair. Power couple. That's what the industry blogs called us. But slowly, the narrative shifted. Not externally at first. Publicly, he still sang my praises. But in private, the edges of his admiration began to dull. "Maybe don't speak first at the next board meeting," he once said. "Let them hear from me first. You know how traditional they are." I let it go. When the press quoted him and forgot me, he told me not to be so sensitive. When his mother introduced me to guests as Colin's wife, the creative one, and never once as co-founder or executive, I laughed it off. Because love meant compromise, right? I remember the first time I saw the look in Mia's eyes, my best friend since high school, when she met him. She pulled me aside after brunch and said, "He's slick. I don't trust anyone that charming. Wolves don't always growl. Some wear cashmere." I told her she was being dramatic. It's funny. We always think we're the exception. That somehow we'll be the ones who fix the red flags. That our love story is too strong to unravel. I gave up a lot for Colin. My last name. My apartment. A startup offer in New York that could have doubled my salary in a year. I moved into his world, his family's circle, their Sunday brunches, their country club smiles. They welcomed me politely, but never as an equal. I'd walk into meetings, and his uncle would ask if I was taking minutes. I once heard his cousin say I had ideas but not leadership energy. When I brought it up to Colin, he laughed and said, "They're dinosaurs. You scare them. It means you're doing something right." And yet, he never corrected them. Not once. Every win we achieved, a new investor, a successful product launch, media buzz, somehow became his moment. I was praised as supportive, never strategic. When things went wrong, I was the one called in to explain. He knew how to love bomb and ice me in equal measure. When I pulled away, he would reel me back in with soft words and forehead kisses. A necklace on my birthday. A weekend trip after a rough quarter. Perfume on anniversaries. Always blue orchid. Like a reset button. Like he could rewrite whatever had been said the week before. And I wanted so badly for it to work. For our dream to be real. I believed that if I just tried harder, if I worked longer hours, softened my tone, gave him more space, that we could make it. But somewhere in the process of becoming us, I disappeared. I started skipping. Dinners with friends. I stopped painting. I stopped writing in my journal. My laughter felt borrowed. My body felt foreign. I became the woman behind the man behind the empire. And I told myself it was enough. Until that email, the one that snapped the illusion in two. Looking back now, I don't know if Colin ever loved me for me, or if he just loved the version of me that built him a kingdom. I gave him my mind, my trust, my blueprint, and he used it to wall me out. The summons came at 7:42 a.m., a calendar invite labeled, Executive Session, Urgent Restructuring Review. No explanation, no prior discussion. Just Colin's name in the organizer field and the usual list of board members and senior execs, plus me. It was unlike him to be so formal. Which, of course, should have been my first clue. I spent the morning rehearsing things in my head. Rationalizations, mostly. Maybe the company was pivoting. Maybe it was a funding issue. Maybe. I wore black. It wasn't intentional. At first. Just the only thing that didn't feel like a lie in my closet. But looking back, it felt like mourning. Like I already knew. When I arrived at the conference room, the door was already closed. Through the glass, I could see Colin at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. He looked polished, rehearsed. There was a stiffness in his posture that I hadn't seen before. The room quieted as I walked in. I felt every eye flicker to me, then away, as if they'd rehearsed this too. "Glad you could join us, Amelia," Colin said, neutral. Not a hint of affection or warmth. Just like that. Amelia, not Millie. Something inside me shifted. He began with numbers, declining engagement, market shifts, the need for agile leadership and innovative voices. I waited for the moment my name would be mentioned. Surely he'd look at me, bring me in, turn this into a discussion. But then he clicked the remote. Slide 5. Realignment. Strategy consolidate brand oversight under CMO remove co-founder position. Non-essential title. Transition legacy leadership into advisory roles official statement. Co-founder steps back for personal growth. There it was. I wasn't a person anymore. Just a slide, a line item, legacy leadership. Like I was a dusty photo in a hallway no one walked down anymore. "I'd like to thank Amelia for her years of service," Colin said, eyes skimming past mine. "She's expressed in recent months that she's feeling burnt out." "I never said that," I cut in. My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. Not once. There was a silence. Thick, uncomfortable. A few board members shifted in their seats. "Amelia," Colin said, lips tight. "Let's not make this personal." I laughed. It was a short, brittle sound. "You're firing me from my own company and calling it not personal?" He exhaled, through his nose. "The vote is scheduled. Let's allow the process to speak." And just like that, they voted. 8-2. Even Natalie, the woman I'd mentored for 3 years, the one who once sobbed in my arms during a layoff, looked away when she raised her hand. It passed. I don't remember standing or walking out, only that my heels echoed against the marble in a way that made me feel hollow. I reached the hallway, clutching the folder I never got to open, when I heard footsteps behind me. Millie. I turned. He was leaning against the wall like this was just another meeting. "Don't do this," I said. "You can still reverse it." His voice was low, measured. "It's done." I stared at him. Really stared. The man who once whispered ideas to me at 2 a.m., who used to sketch business plans on napkins and kiss the ink smudges off my fingers. That man was gone. In his place stood someone cooler, harder. "You said you were tired," he added softly. "This is just business." The words landed like a slap, not because they were harsh, but because they were so calm, so detached. "You emptied the accounts, Colin." He didn't even flinch. "Just the joint ones. For legal clarity, security reasons." I nodded slowly, my vision beginning to blur. "Loved you," I whispered. He didn't say it back. I don't remember driving home, only that the sky looked gray, not stormy, just drained. The house felt sterile, like a showroom someone had half abandoned. A single wine glass in the sink. The faintest scent of blue orchid still clinging to the hallway rug. When I reached for the doorknob to our bedroom, it was locked. I knocked. No answer. So I walked into the guest room and collapsed onto the mattress, still dressed, heels digging, into the carpet. Hours later, I stripped down and stepped into the shower. The water was too hot. I didn't care. I wanted it to burn. I needed it to cleanse. My skin turned pink, then red. I pressed my forehead to the tile and sobbed. The kind of sob that folds your body in on itself, that claws through your chest like it wants out. I stayed there until the hot water ran cold. When I finally stepped out, dripping and shaking, I caught my reflection in the fogged mirror. Mascara streaked, red eyes, my wedding ring still on. I slid it off and left it on the bathroom counter. Later, wrapped in a towel, I found an old photo tucked in the back of my drawer, one from our launch party. Colin had his arm around me, both of us smiling, bright and ambitious. I stared at it for a long time. Then I tore it in half. Not out of rage, but because something inside me had shifted. Cracked, yes, but not shattered. There was a difference. That night I lit a candle and wrote the word exit in my journal. Just that one word. Then I turned the page, and on the next, wrote blueprint. Because I didn't know what came next yet, only that it would be mine. I left in the dark. Not metaphorically, but literally. At 3:12 a.m., with the city still, sleeping and my bags already packed, I slid the key to our apartment across the marble counter and walked out without making a sound. I didn't leave a note. I didn't take the Audi. I didn't even check if he was home. Instead, I drove my father's old Volvo, the one with a cracked dashboard and a cassette player that still worked, all the way upstate to a cottage no one had touched in years. It was tucked at the edge of Stillwater Lake, behind a narrow gravel path lined with wild pine and birch. My father bought it when I was a teenager, a place to write, to fish, to escape the noise. He used to call it his reset button. It became mine too. When I unlocked the front door, the air inside was thick with dust and quiet. A faded tartan blanket still hung over the back of the old armchair. The smell of pine, mildew, and firewood was exactly as I remembered, grounding and raw, like nature had been holding its breath. I lit a fire. I boiled water. I wrapped myself in an old sweater that smelled like cedar and something like memory. Then I collapsed onto the couch and cried until sleep took me, deep and dreamless. The days blurred. No meetings, no schedules, no Colin. I rose, with the sun, and swam in the freezing lake each morning, my skin going numb, breath catching in my throat. It hurt, but it reminded me I was still alive. I chopped wood, badly at first, then better. I cleaned out the fridge and filled it with produce from the town market 10 miles down the road. I found my old journals and filled them with ink and tears and things I couldn't yet say aloud. I bled on the page. Rage, longing, shame, love, still, stubborn and echoing, despite everything. And silence. So much silence. It was terrifying at first, then comforting. Like the world was slowly, patiently handing me back the pieces of myself I didn't realize I'd given away. One evening, a storm rolled in. I sat by the fire with a blanket around my shoulders and a cup of black tea steeped so long it tasted like earth. I reread Jane Eyre and found myself underlining passages I'd once skimmed. There was a line I couldn't shake. I am no bird, and no net ensnares me. I am a free human being with an independent will. I read it 3 times. Whispered it out loud like a vow. I met Eleanor on a rainy Wednesday in the town's only bookstore, a narrow, dusty little space that smelled like lavender and forgotten stories. She had silver hair in a loose braid and wore scarves like armor. She noticed the poetry collection in my hands and said, "That one breaks you, but in the good way." She invited me for tea. I went, not out of politeness, but need. Her home was lined with books. No television, no noise. Just the hum of an old kettle and a cat named Simone who judged me in silence. We talked. About literature, mostly. Then grief. Then men. "I was married once," she said, handing me a chipped mug. "He left me for a woman 20 years younger. Took the house. I took the art." She smiled. Best deal I ever made. I laughed for the first time in weeks. Not politely. Not because it was expected. But real. From the ribs. We began meeting every few days. She lent me volumes of poetry. I brought bread from the farmer's market. We read Neruda aloud on rainy days and sipped wine on her porch on clear ones. She never asked what I had left behind. She just said, "Survival is the first act. Becoming is the second." That line stayed with me. The healing wasn't linear. Some days I felt powerful. Other days I didn't leave bed, but slowly, gently. Something in me began to shift. I started painting again. Badly, abstractly. I covered old canvas with blues and silvers and streaks of red I couldn't explain. I danced alone in the kitchen to music from my 20s. Wrote a list called Things I Am, separate from him. I dreamed again, not of business plans or boardrooms, but of stories. Spaces for women like me, safe ones, strong ones. I wasn't ready to return yet, but I was no longer fleeing. I was becoming. It was near the end of October, just as the leaves began to fall in sheets of amber and gold, that I found the letter. I was cleaning out the old bookshelf, in the study, wiping off volumes of law and philosophy that once belonged to my father, when I pulled out a thick copy of the Constitution of Wealth gifted to me years ago by Colin's father, Richard. He had been the only one in that family who ever truly saw me. Inside, tucked between the pages, was an envelope. Yellowed, unsealed. My name written on the front in Richard's neat, deliberate handwriting. I sat down on the floor, back, against the shelf, and opened it with trembling fingers. The letter was dated 18 months before his death. "Amelia, if you're reading this, then something has gone wrong. I always believed you were the soul of what Colin wanted to build, and the backbone of what McAllister and Comrade became, which is why I left something in place. Not to favor you, but to protect what I helped create. Attached to my estate are certain conditions. In the event of betrayal, and yes, I use that word, I've instructed my legal advisors to grant you majority proxy rights, You may never need it, but if you do, it's yours. I trust you'll know what to do. Richard, I read it twice. Then again. My pulse thundered. This changed everything. Not because of revenge, not even because of justice, but because it meant I wasn't crazy. I wasn't invisible. I had been seen. And now, maybe, just maybe, I had a way to make things right. The morning after I read Richard's letter, the lake was still, a mirror of gray sky and fallen leaves floating like forgotten promises. I stood barefoot at the water's edge, the letter clutched in one hand, my breath visible in the October chill. I didn't cry. Instead, I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger, not vengeance. Clarity. I called my lawyer first, Eva Mendez, an old friend from grad school who had traded boardrooms for private practice and, in her words, less bullshit. She listened as I read the letter to her aloud, her silence loud with calculation. If what he says is true, she said after a beat, you don't just have grounds, you have leverage. You might own the company. I exhaled slowly, the words strange but powerful. Own, not win, not fight for. Own Eva connected me to Richard's former estate manager, a quiet man named Barrett, whose voice reminded me of oak furniture and decades of discretion. He confirmed it. The clause was real, buried as an addendum filed with a private firm, only executable if I could provide documented evidence of betrayal, financial, strategic, or ethical. You'll need proof, Barrett said. And a damn good story. I had both. I returned to the city under cover of dusk, like a ghost retracing the footprints she once left in wet cement. The apartment was no longer mine. I didn't want it anyway. I stayed in a short-term rental, the kind with plain walls and minimalist decor. Nothing personal enough to haunt me. I didn't notify anyone. I didn't change my name. I just moved like water, around, beneath, and through the spaces that once belonged to me. I started quietly. A call to Tessa, our former financial controller, who had resigned under mysterious circumstances last spring. Amelia, she asked hesitantly, is this real? I told her what I was doing. Her voice cracked when she said, I was waiting for you to come back. She sent me internal reports she'd backed up to her personal drive, flagged transactions, missing invoices, offshore allocations under project codes that didn't exist. They all traced back to Colin. Another call, this time to Jonah, our former head of operations. He confirmed redundancies that were staged to justify restructuring, including mine. Each piece was a nail, each voice a match. I built a spreadsheet, a timeline, a dossier of betrayal so precise it looked fictional, except it wasn't. It was real. It was mine. In between the calls and document reviews, I lived. I signed up for a coding boot camp under my maiden name, not because I wanted to become a developer, but because I wanted to reclaim my brain. I remembered the girl who once stayed up all night just to figure out a new system, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. I wore jeans and sneakers. I walked the city without being recognized. I smiled more than I had in years. One afternoon, I was invited to speak at a women's leadership forum by an organizer who had followed my early work before I married into the McAllister name. She didn't ask about Colin. She asked about me, so I went. I stood behind the podium and told a room full of women about how ambition could be seductive, how love and erasure often came dressed in the same suit. I didn't name him. I didn't need to. I spoke about rebuilding, not for revenge, but for truth. I watched as heads nodded, as pens scribbled, as women reached out after to say, "You spoke the words I couldn't find." Afterward, I walked backstage and cried. Not because I was sad, but because for the first time in years I felt real, unedited, whole. I started a consultancy under a pseudonym, working with early-stage female founders who were tired of being sidelined in rooms full of tailored suits and just playing devil's advocate voices. I coached them on pitching, on legal protection, on branding, but mostly I taught them how to stay visible in their own stories. One evening, I received a handwritten thank you note from a client who wrote, "You made me feel like I deserved to exist. As I am." I folded it and placed it in the same wooden box where I now kept Richard's letter. A reminder that not all inheritance is financial. Some of it is belief. I no longer wore perfume. I kept the blue orchid bottle tucked in a drawer, half full. A relic of who I used to be. Fragrant, invisible, trying to be pleasing. Instead, I wore citrus oils now. Sharp, clean, honest. By early winter, my file was complete. Eva reviewed everything twice and said, "This is bulletproof." We scheduled a formal presentation to the board, quietly, strategically. No press, no theatrics, just truth. As the date approached, I didn't sleep much, but I didn't doubt either. Doubt had left me the moment I remembered who I was, without Colin's shadow pressed against my spine. The night before the meeting, I sat alone by the lake again, back in the cottage where I'd become someone new. I wrote a final journal entry, not a plan, not a list, just a truth. I am not here to destroy anyone. I am here to be seen, to reclaim the space I built, the voice I quieted, the name I gave away. I am not his wife. I am not a footnote. I am the story. I closed the book, tied my hair back, and packed my things. The morning of the meeting, I dressed with deliberate hands. Navy. Always navy. The color Colin once said made me look strong and expensive, as if women were handbags. To be appraised, I wore it anyway, not for him, but for the part of me that used to shrink under fluorescent lights and strategic silences. A tailored navy suit, soft charcoal heels, no jewelry, except a small silver pin my mother once gave me that read, "Resilience is quiet." It had been 6 months since I walked out of that boardroom, humiliated, erased. 6 months since I'd stepped into the office I helped design, into the company I helped birth. Now, I was returning not as an executive, or a wife, or a ghost. Was returning as truth. The annual shareholder meeting was held in the Westview Ballroom of the downtown Grand Regency. All velvet panels, faux gold trim, and overcompensating grandeur. A woman at the reception desk blinked when she saw me, Miss Densau's. "McCall," she paused, unsure. "Amelia?" I smiled politely. "Yes, I'm here for the general session. I'll be presenting." Her eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing, just gestured toward the doors, where a familiar hum of power play chatter floated out, layered, with coffee, ambition, and self-congratulation. Inside, the board sat arranged in a semicircle under muted spotlights. A glossy projection screen glowed with the company's new slogan: Evolve, Empower, Excel. Colin stood near the podium, mid-conversation with a group of investors, all tan suits and thin laughter. He turned, saw me. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Well," he said, brushing imaginary lint from his sleeve. "Look who finally came home." "I was always home," I replied. "You just locked the door." He gave a short laugh, but his jaw tightened. "You're not on the schedule." "I know, but I'm on the record." That's when Eva appeared beside me, calm and composed, holding the leather folio containing the documents. She nodded once, at Colin, and then we walked to the front. "I won't take much of your time," I said into the mic. My voice didn't shake, but I do believe the shareholders, and this board, deserve a complete view of the company's recent trajectory. Colin tried to interrupt, but Eva raised her hand and placed the notarized clause from Richard's will on the table. Ms. Amelia McAllister, she said formally, holds majority proxy authority in the event of demonstrated misconduct by the current CEO, per the estate instructions of the late Richard McAllister, founder and board chair emeritus. You all signed acknowledgement of this clause in your onboarding packets. Page 93. The room fell still. Dead still. I began. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't dramatize. I presented facts, like case exhibits in a trial that had already reached its verdict. I showed them the ledger discrepancies. The shell companies, the falsified vendor contracts, Tessa's flagged reports, Jonah's resignation letter citing ethical concerns, slide after slide. The whispers started. Chairs shifted, phones buzzed. Colin tried to laugh it off. At first. This is personal, he scoffed. You're weaponizing an old man's paranoia. That's when I placed the letter on the table. The original, signed by Richard, addressed to me. Every eye turned to it. Eva slid copies down the table like playing cards in a final round. Colin paled. Amelia, he said softly. Let's talk. In private. We don't need to. No, I said, louder now. We do. I took one step forward. You made me invisible in rooms I built. You called it business. You called it structure. You said I was tired. But what I was, what I am, is done. The chairwoman cleared her throat. We'll take an immediate vote on executive leadership restructuring. It passed. 9-1. Colin's vote was the one. He stood there, stunned, hands at his sides, mouth slightly open like he'd forgotten how to smile without getting what he wanted. You don't have to do this, he murmured. I looked at him. Really looked. There was a time I might have cried, might have begged, might have softened. But that woman was gone. I already did, I said. Then I took off the wedding ring, the one he'd given me with such trembling sincerity, on a cliff in Santorini all those years ago, and placed it gently beside the letter. And beside that, I placed an envelope marked resignation, not from the company. From him. He reached out once, hesitating, like he wanted to stop me. But he didn't. Not really, because even he knew. It was over. I walked out through the glass-paneled lobby, where my heels echoed like punctuation. Outside, sunlight poured, down like a blessing, touching the steel buildings and making them shimmer like a city reborn. For the first time in years, the city didn't feel cold. It felt like mine. Back at the cottage that evening, I lit a single candle on the edge of the dock and sat cross-legged beside it, wrapped in a wool shawl. The lake was still again, dark and velvet soft. The wind carried the faint smell of pine and frost. I whispered a quiet goodbye to the woman who gave too much, to the dream that turned into a trap, to the love that wasn't love at all. Then I blew the candle out. The smoke curled upward, then vanished, and I felt free.